Hello! It's the Great Canadian Bagel here, coming to you with the next update to the Canadian federal election forecasting series. So now, we're still obviously well away from an election. None have been called, though, as I will go on later in the video, it's not unreasonable that one might be happening. So, more updates to this, and the current situation is warranted. So what has changed since the last update? Well, the most important one, west to east, the NDP have lost a seat in BC to the Conservatives. The Liberals have lost a seat in Alberta to the Conservatives. Ontario is now still tied, but Conservatives edging, whereas last update it was tied, but Liberals slightly edging forward, and the Conservatives have gained 3 seats to the expense of the Liberals. In Quebec, the Liberals have lost 2 seats, with the Bloc and the Conservatives gaining 1 each. New Brunswick, PEI, Newfoundland have stayed the same, and Nova Scotia is now slightly safer for the Liberals. Overall, we have seen a 6-seat decline for the Liberals, a 6-seat gain for the Conservatives, a 1-seat gain for the Bloc, and a 1-seat decline for the NDP. So, that is where we at. So now, why? What's going on? So, it's not unheard of for a leaderless party to surge temporarily. However, unlike potential past examples, people can point to that, I don't think that's the case here. Because at no point has this Conservative leadership race been a competitive race. Poilievre has been winning the entire time. As soon as the field consolidated, he's been winning. Not a surprise. His opposition are less popular than him, or less well known than him. They might have their own merits. Baber, Lewis, Aitchison, Charest, lesser extent Brown, he's no longer in the race anymore. These people may have their own merits, and they may have their own qualifications, but they lack the je ne sais quoi that Poilievre is running with right now. So I hazard that this number's right here under Candice Bergen, who is a close Poilievre ally in Parliament, are not going to change very differently. I think voters, for the most part, because keep in mind, a lot of these polls from Abacus, Angus Reid, Leisure, now Main Street, are online panels. And online panels self-select the more politically active people. I think these politically active people have effectively substituted Poilievre in for Candice Bergen. That is my hypothesis. I think when Poilievre wins on September 10th, you're not going to see a meaningful change in these numbers because of his inauguration. The trajectory it's going will stay the same. If it's Conservatives continue to go up, he'll continue to go up. If the Conservatives flatline, he's going to continue to flatline, and if the Conservatives are going down, he's going to go down. I don't think his inauguration as leader will change the shape of the graph. Now, why is that? Well, as I said, I think a lot of voters have substituted him in, and I think a lot of the gain the Conservatives are having in the polls is directly because of his campaign. You look at young voters, the Conservatives are having a huge surge with young voters. There's no good reason, ignoring the leadership race, why that should be occurring, because Bergen, as an interim leader, is not being particularly loud, particularly aggressive, particularly combative to Liberals, and, well, a lot of things are going wrong in Canada. She is not being particularly leading in the attack on what Trudeau's doing. She's really letting Poilievre lead that fight. And to a lesser extent, people like Lewis and Baber. I pick those three in particular because I've not seen many posts from, or campaign stuff from Aitchison or Charest about a lot of these circumstances. So what is the circumstance that's leading to this groundswell that Poilievre is tapping into and the Conservatives are tapping into? Well, to put it bluntly, it's the housing crisis. To put it more broadly, it's the entire shape of the economy since 2008. The Great Recession destroyed most of the West. We've never recovered from it. There's been points under certain leaders in certain places, under certain circumstances, where the economy and society looked like they were approaching normalcy. The early 2010s under Harper in Canada, the late 2010s in the US under Trump, as named two leaders where the economy was approaching normalcy. And by saying normalcy, I mean decent growth rates, interest rates starting to go up, that kind of things. Central bank interest rates, quantitative easing tapering off, again, that kind of things. Reduction in stimulus, those kind of things. Though I guess you wouldn't really say directly that Trump was doing a lot of stimulus, but that's a whole other kettle of fish. I'm not talking about US politics here. Under Trudeau, the last 7 years, all of those things are wrong. Interest rates have cratered up until recently. Quantitative easing has been quite aggressive. And in fact, under COVID, they increased the monetary supply by $400 billion. M1 money supply. And there's been never-ending, ever-increasing deficit spending, quote-unquote, to provide stimulus to a lagging economy with GDP growth in the 1% to 2% range on average, intermittent recessions occurring. There was a recession from, I think, 14 to 16, well, not the entire time period, but those time periods, that window had quite a few intermittent recessions in it. And it likely would have been in a recession as well if it wasn't for COVID. COVID did cause a recession, but we were likely going into a recession regardless of COVID. In Canada in particular. And throughout this entire time, the housing market has completely broken. These are not unlinked. And this is why the Conservatives are gaining ground, because it's becoming very apparent to a lot of people. It's filtering through the news, filtering through social media. The consequences of big, irresponsible government intervention. And that's why the Conservatives are leading. The housing market is almost, not entirely, almost irreversibly screwed. And there's so many factors that are inflating it. Very high immigration rate, where all the immigrants are going to the same couple of cities. Internal immigration going to the same couple of cities. We're not building enough houses for even our natural population growth. And credit is cheap on both the borrowers and the apartment building owners' sides. What this means is there's very little incentive to invest in anything but housing. So housing gets insane. But housing, in general terms, doesn't produce anything. It's not a productive asset. You build an apartment building and you can generate rents from it. That's great. That has economic value. There's nothing wrong with building that apartment building. But it doesn't make more stuff. If you made a new widget machine and you got a couple people working on it, you make more widgets. Now there are more things in the economy. You make more apartment building, you have more bedrooms, people have places to sleep. That's great, but it's not more things. And Western economies are utterly dependent on consumption. We are spending eye-watering amounts of money as a society. Eye-watering amounts of our investment capital on buildings that don't produce anything. And then you look at our flagging economy, and it makes sense. You look at some key indicators. Per capita productivity, 30% lower than the US. You look at GDP per capita. Again, not the best measurement in the world because it skews based off of particularly wealthy people or very successful specific industries. But as a whole, it is a relatively decent measure. Ours has stayed relatively stagnant. Or if you look at something more like household income, ours has stayed relatively stagnant since 2008-ish, and the US hasn't. In fact, under Trump, they had the largest wage gains in decades. Why might that be? Well, when Trump was president, ignoring everything he did, everything the Republicans did, everything the Democrats did while he was in office, everything all the states did, one of the biggest things is the central bank started pushing up interest rates ever so slowly, ever so slightly. You might think that should hurt the economy. But no, because the interest rates we have right now are artificially low. So as I just said, they are forcing investment into real estate, not productive capital. Then you had all these other policies, and you start seeing this capital going from real estate to productive enterprises. So we have a multifold problem here. The central bank being irresponsible, pushing up interest rates, or keeping interest rates really low, keeping quantitative easing relatively high, made housing unaffordable, and has hurt the economy as a whole. Because that's how that always works. People will argue to you in Keynesian terms that you got to intervene in the economy during a recession to fix the economy, or to help people out, bail out things, ease the recession, recover the GDP. But even in the Keynesian model, short-term intervention in the economy causes long-term harm. And it's obvious to see why. You go in, you bail out a company. What did that do? It stopped a company from failing. Why was that company failing? Bad management, bad marketing, bad products. Some combination of those things. Or possibly inefficient production. That's another option too. But by keeping that company there, it might be barely above water in good times, and it dies in recession. Okay, you keep it alive in the recession, well now you still have an extremely inefficient sector of your economy. You've kept that propelling. It's not going to grow very quickly. It's not going to reinvest very well. It's not going to become a more successful business because the business should have died. In a lot of ways, it's like keeping someone on life support who is brain dead. Their body persists, but they're never going to live meaningfully again. And that's what the Liberal Party in Canada has done. Big, spendy budgets, quote-unquote, stimulating the economy with a very lax central bank who looks at flawed inflation numbers. I say flawed because they consider the price of housing among many things in their inflation criteria. So they don't notice or maybe they do and they're negligent, that their cheap capital is inflating the market for housing. Okay, so we get this situation. Overinflated housing, wages not growing, they're flagging, our productivity is lower than everyone else. The OECD is predicting the next 50 years, barring any major changes, that we are going to be the worst performer of the OECD in economic growth. And you wonder why the Liberal Party is starting to fail. What Poilievre is selling, and again, I'm using Poilievre here because I think people have largely substituted him in for Bergen, at least those who are actually polled. What is he advocating for? Well, he wants to reduce government spending. He wants to have a more responsible governor of the central bank. He wants to reduce the government footprint. And I'll just put a note here, this is not entirely the Fed's fault. The provinces also have a lot of blame because a lot of provinces have been doing a lot of big spendy, stimulus-y budgets, which have also been devastating. For some reason, it's really embarrassing too because a lot of premiers are conservatives. They don't have the balls to tell people the truth. I very much despise this in politics when politicians believe something but then do the opposite because they think it will help them win. I'm sorry, if you can't convince people that your ideology is correct, is your ideology right? Why do you believe it? If you fail, that's one thing. But if you don't even want to try, do you believe it? Are you actually conservative if you don't want to try to tell people that you can't just keep spending government money? Government doesn't produce anything. It just breaks the market economy. What we have now in Canada is the worst monstrosity combination of a market economy and a planned economy. Some people describe it as we privatize the profits and socialize the losses. Yes, perhaps. But the way I would describe it, is the government decides when we grow, but the private sector decides how to grow. Now, that might not sound bad on the surface, but the problem is when the government is manipulating the economy to cause it to grow, you've distorted the market. And smart business people will see this and will exploit it. And they should. I don't see anything wrong morally with the apartment building owner who is keeping his apartment completely vacant because he makes more money that way. Because of complicated economic reasons, he technically has higher asset growth instead of having a rent-controlled apartment. Rentee. I don't think there's anything morally wrong with that person. The government has created a circumstance where it makes more sense for him to not rent his building. That's not his problem. That's the government's problem. They screwed the pooch. And people are starting to see this. It's starting to become very apparent. And that's why, particularly among the youth, the Conservative Party is growing. But they're not taking it from the Liberals, per se. Because the Liberals, their party under Trudeau, is largely a cult of personality. Yes, they're going to take some hits and some losses. Like, we pop over here to my other graphic, and I scroll over so you can actually see it. Yes, it's a bit chaotic-y, so I'll just zoom in real quick so we can see it a bit better. So we see here, what are Liberals at? 31.7. Let's round up 31.7. About 5 points below the Conservatives. Okay. they're not going to fall that much. They were at 2.6 last election. This is about a 1-point drop. That shouldn't surprise you. That shouldn't surprise you. Where are the Conservatives' number coming from? Right now, it's mostly coming from the People's Party. They've lost about 2 points, and the Conservatives have gained roughly 2 points. Some a bit from the Bloc, though I'm a bit skeptical from the Bloc's losses. The Bloc tends to be really underpolled, and my model can only correct so much. Others lost a bit of ground too. That doesn't particularly matter, right? What matters largely is the Liberal numbers aren't going to fall much. As long as Trudeau is the Prime Minister, or is the leader of the Liberal Party, I don't think the Liberals are going to fall much below 30. He has a core base. Even right now, it's like 35% of Canadians approve of his work. Almost entirely the Liberal base. But whatever. Approval rating, or disapproval rating doesn't matter in Canada. All that matters is approval. And Trudeau has proven you can win with only 32.6% of the vote. However, he's losing a lot of ground elsewhere. And the other big one, or the losing ground, not necessarily, the Conservatives are gaining a lot of ground everywhere because of, more votes. The big one at risk here is Singh. Now, you might be like, Bagel, you have the NDP at 18.2%. They only scored 17 in whatever last election. Yeah, the model has them high. But that's because I think the polling is overestimating. The polling outside of elections wildly overestimates the NDP. Wildly. It's not even close. Like, the last election I got, I believe 17.8, and a lot of polls pre-election, before the campaign started, had them in the high teens, low 20s. They were like 3 or 4 percentage points overpolled in July before the election. I think when we actually get down to the election, and people actually vote, I think NDP is going to be decimated. In fact, the Liberals might gain vote share. Because Trudeau is slowly moving to the left. If we simplify the standard 2D spectrum, he's slowly moving to the left, and I think the NDP Liberal swing voters are finding it harder to vote NDP. And the non-NDP Liberal swing voters are tired of Singh. Singh is an inept, useless leader. He gave Trudeau a blank check to run the economy, and look, it's falling apart. And he can't do anything about it. He moans and complains constantly in the news about how bad the economy is, or how people are being exploited, or how the whatever is unjust. But then he gives the Liberals a blank check to continue governing. He's a disgrace. I don't know how anyone can vote for him. In fact, I think it's an embarrassment to Canada if he manages to win re-election. If you are a Singh voter and you are in his riding, consider voting literally anyone else. I don't care who you vote for. Singh is an embarrassment. The NDP really should have tossed him after 2019, where he did terrible, because Mulcair only got 1 try, did better than him, but Singh gets 3 tries, and he did worse than Mulcair twice. I don't really like Mulcair, but that's not very fair, just saying. So where are we at, right? Well, we're far from an election, you could say. Maybe this won't matter. Maybe the economy will recover, and people have short memories about politics, so Trudeau will recover in the polls. Well, I don't think so. The central bank is trying these days on inflation, but I don't think we're going to go back down to normal inflation levels for years. The earliest estimate I saw was 2024 to go back to normal, and I've also seen people saying that the inflation's not going to start going down until 2024. Now, I don't work in economic forecasting. I do political forecasting, plus a real job that involves software. This is not a real job yet. One day, maybe. So I'm not going to comment on the validity of these economic models I've seen. just that they exist. So we could be anywhere from 2024, we're back to normal inflation-wise, to 2024, we're starting to go back to normal inflation-wise. And then you have, we're likely going to be going into a recession. The U.S. is in one right now. We're likely going to be trending towards one. We only had 0.8% last quarter. Likely going to have lower this quarter. Apparently a lot of key markers are not great. Again, not an economist. We might not be negative this quarter, but I don't think we're going to do better than last quarter, I guess is what I'll say. Though the RBC, I believe, has forecasted that we are going to see a recession by 2020, sometime in 2023. So there's not just me suggesting this. I don't think it's going to get better meaningfully before 2025. And in fact, if we see a recession, I think it might become untenable politically for the NDP to continue backing the Trudeau government. Considering nothing about right now can be blamed on anybody else. All of our economic problems right now, even if they started before the Liberal government, they've had 7 years. By 2025, they'll have 11 years. Or, well, 10 years, to fix it. They haven't. Well, that's your fault. The problem might have existed before you're in office, but if you haven't made any strides to fixing it, that's on you. When we look at more pressing things to the individual Canadian, housing, rent prices, those aren't going down. Not anytime soon. Like, yes, the housing prices have decreased a little bit in Toronto. I think it was like 47,000 or something like that. But they went down a little bit from the peak. Maybe if our interest rates keep going up, we'll get there. But I've already seen people suggesting we should stop raising the interest rates. Oh, well, I'm so glad you think 8% inflation is fine. That's commodity inflation too, by the way. That's not even talking about housing prices. Wow. So, yeah. Things are probably not going to get better. Not soon. Not for the Liberals. So then the Liberals are given an interesting gamble. And this is a gamble. And by no means am I saying this is guaranteed or likely. Just that it is a potential gamble. Do they take the poison pill and call a snap election on slightly after September 10th? Let's walk the scenario. Poilievre wins September 10th, becomes the new leader of the Conservative Party. I've seen people who work on political campaigns suggest that it takes 6 months for a new leader to get the party in order and to get an election platform ready. Trudeau calls a snap election so that the election day is the third Sunday or the third Monday of October, which is their normal fall election time. So we get there's 40-day period, so he calls it the end of September. Poilievre gets 7 weeks, maybe, or we want to be generous, as leader to get the House in order before election day, 3 weeks before the election called. And the idea is to try to catch him off guard so Trudeau can try to exploit Liberal vote efficiency to win a majority. Doesn't seem very likely, considering where the vote shares are going, but it is worth noting. 5-point lead for the Conservatives. The Liberals are only 20 seats back. Now, this would be a Conservative minority government because the Bloc, no matter what anyone's going to tell you, the Bloc will 100% back the Conservatives before joining a three-way coalition. They back the Conservatives, they get king-making power. They get a veto power, basically. It'll be an unofficial coalition for the record, but they get a lot of sway, especially since Quebec is starting to swing more right-wing and the Bloc doesn't want to alienate CAQ voters. But that's another matter altogether. So that is the potential option. It's very high risk because Trudeau could throw away his government right there. And I don't think the Liberal Party will keep him once he loses. There's already been a lot of talk about him replacing him already. His brand is pretty spent. Though, I don't like Trudeau. I'll be honest. I think Trudeau isn't a very good leader. I think he's very narcissistic. But Trudeau is a unicorn candidate. Who's he going to be replaced by? Most of Trudeau's cabinet are basically yes people. A lot of his actually accomplished ministers are really heavily tarnished, like Freeland, or have been pushed out and disgraced, like Morneau. There's not many people you could really point to replace him. And some names people throw around, Champagne. I think he's too centrist for the Liberal base to support him. Now, there could always be someone coming through the wings, but in Canada, it's very rare for someone who's not an MP or provincial MP, or I guess a provincial premier in the case of Jean Charest, to have any traction in a leadership race. They emerge, by all means, but very rarely. In fact, in the last two Conservative leadership races, all the candidates who managed to get on the ballot were MPs, provincial MPs, or former premier. The Liberal Party has only one province with an affiliate party governing it, Newfoundland. The Nova Scotia Liberal Party is pretty much in disarray, and all of the remaining people in it are pretty much no names in Nova Scotia, where I'm from, for people who are new. So if I don't know anyone else, most of the cabinet ministers a lot of the cabinet ministers lost their re-election or retired from the last Nova Scotia Liberal government, so there's not many. Newfoundland, PEI in New Brunswick, I don't know for certain, but there's not a ton, even there. So there's not a lot of places to draw provincially from. They exist, by all means, but there's not a lot. And federally, as I said, there's not a lot of big names. I think it's very much going to be similar to when Paul Martin stepped down. There was no really good, charismatic, big people to replace him with. And the Liberals languished into a distant second, and then into a third place under Ignatieff and some other guy, I forget his name. That's how unnotable he is. I mean, he was Liberal leader when I was a wee lad, so I was like 11? I think it was 11, 2008. Yeah, that makes sense. So, yeah, there we are. There's no obvious replacements. The Liberal Party is in a bad circumstance. Their biggest saving grace might be that the NDP apparently has no desire to win federally and will probably keep Jagmeet Singh as their leader, who's even worse than any of the candidates that the Liberals could throw. Liberals could throw Freeland, for example, and I think Freeland, if Trudeau loses, Freeland's also going to lose. They're too similar. They're too correlated. I don't think she'll perform any different electorally. She might even perform worse because she doesn't have Trudeau's name, I guess. But she'll probably perform better than Jagmeet Singh. I can't think of a single real possibility for Liberals who would be worse than Singh. Who perform worse than Singh. Now, the NDP could replace Singh with somebody. If the Liberals are to name names for, Singh is even... NDP is even harder. I've heard some people speculate, like, is the name Charlie Angus, I believe, as a potential replacement for Singh. Though I will say the NDP does have bigger, more meaningful parties in BC, Alberta, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, and Ontario for that matter. So they have a lot more room for provincial-wise to draw people from, though their federal caucus is fairly small. So hard to say there. Though, since they are a third party, well, I mean, I guess they're fourth place actually because of the bloc. It could be that they have some actually competent and good MPs, but they don't get airtime. That's also possible. But in the Liberals, all of their big names you would assume are cabinet ministers or other high-ranking people, and there's not many of them you can point to. So what does this all mean, right? Well, I think the Liberals are done. I really do. I don't... Barring the Conservatives shooting themselves in the foot, such as, let's say, Poilievre pulling in O'Fool and flip-flopping on major issues, I don't think the Conservatives can lose. Whether the next race is next or 2 months from now or 2 years from now. This is their race to lose. Not only are you looking at a long-term someone who's been incumbent for ages, Trudeau, but you're looking at flagging economic indicators in pretty much every sector. Young people are suffering and are turning blue faster than any other point in history, at least since we've had polling. These aren't good numbers. And no matter how much the mainstream media or the liberal establishment people try to smear Poilievre, it doesn't work. It doesn't work. The people who feel desperate see him and he brings hope to them. People act like he's an angry, anti-establishment populist. And sure, possible he's a populist, and sure, he's possibly anti-establishment. But he's not angry. His campaign's about hope. And that's why the Liberals are in trouble. But I'll wrap it up there. If you liked the video, by all means, like, share, subscribe. Bring it out to your friends. Send it to a random stranger down the street. Wrap it up in an envelope and send it out to someone far away. Bring the message. It helps the channel. Brings up the views. Gets subscribers. It's all great, all these things. Really helps me out. Otherwise, I mean, comment what you think. I love the comments. They're always really fun. But with that, I bid you all adieu, and I will see you next time. Tuesday, probably.